Picture a hunter-gatherer 13,000 years past. Zero megastores, zero iceboxes, zero DoorDash. You dwell in a den, in what might one day become Israel, accompanied by folks you truly enjoy, which, let's be frank, is scarcer than we admit even today. You've been trekking all day. Your soul's ache. You hold no notion of sneakers that run more than $100, which is truly the sole detail regarding your condition that might be deemed an upgrade beyond modern living. Then one morning, somebody in your tribe spots some wheat that's been resting inside a damp rock mortar for a little too long. It reeks, strangely. It appears frothy. Something has visibly occurred with it. Something organic. Something bizarre. Yet for motives that break all reason and every survival impulse a rational ape should have fostered, somebody chooses to gulp it regardless. That individual, perhaps the most crucial human being who ever existed. Since that mishap, or that lone instance of unbelievable careless glorious inquisitiveness, might have put mankind onto a trail that altered everything. Not merely festivals. Not only tipsy ants at Christmas feasts who begin sharing about their emotions past the second cup. Everything. Society, farming, theology, literacy, the whole framework of mortal social existence as we perceive it. Thus, when precisely did early mortals first consume liquor? Plus, more crucially, why did we initially begin? Strap in. Because the truth stretches way, way farther backward than you assume. Plus, it begins not with people at all. It originates with primates. Let's commence with an inquiry that feels absurd on the exterior, yet is genuinely the most pivotal one we might pose. Were people anatomically built to process booze in the initial phase? Most beasts, whenever they ingest ethanol in any significant amount, essentially topple over and perish, or at baseline endure a highly uncomfortable phase. Their systems won't metabolize it effectively. Their organs mount an instant rebellion. The entire ordeal proves, for most species on Earth, something midway profoundly terrible and lethal. Yet mankind and our near-simian cousins are unique. We possess a distinct protein named alcohol dehydrogenase 4, or ADH4, which helps us break down ethanol with shocking speed. Our physiques are to an impressive extent designed to manage this compound. Then here lies the detail that must freeze you in your steps. That catalyst didn't emerge when society crafted wine. It didn't surface when farming started. It manifested approximately 10 million years prior. 10 million seasons. That is before Homo sapiens lived. That is before Homo erectus breathed. That's preceding virtually anything folks would identify as a human entity was wandering about on this globe. This alteration arose low in the simian family lineage, just near the era when early forebears were shifting from passing most of their days in the canopy to passing more hours on the dirt. This implies for 10 million years, far before humans were actively electing to sip, our physiques were indeed gearing for the dynamic. A scientist at UC Berkeley titled Robert Dudley invested 25 years attempting to puzzle out reasons. Plus, the hypothesis he crafted holds the finest title in the annals of academia. He dubs it the inebriated macaque postulate. The concept remains beautiful in its basicness. Early archaic ape predecessors consumed produce. Massive volumes of produce. Produce stood an essential energy supply for millions of years. Plus produce, when it becomes mature really, flawlessly mature, starts to sour. Fungi that dwell organically in the surroundings settle on the skin of the produce, devour the carbohydrates within, and yield ethanol as an offshoot. The produce begins to reek mildly of booze. This implies that for millions of years, each time some ape discovered a chunk of flawlessly mature produce, it was simultaneously unearthing minor doses of ethanol. Then here's the main takeaway. The scent of ethanol wasn't a caution signal. It shone a lighthouse. It signaled, this produce rests at peak maturity, peak sugariness, peak nutritional worth. It signaled, devour this today before it's lost. Those forebears who overlooked that soured aroma missed out on simple energy and abandoned them for somebody else. The ones who tracked the odor, who were lured to it, who sensed an urge toward it, these predecessors acquired extra nourishment, endured further, bore extra children, and handed this inclination down the lineage. Across millions of seasons, through the entirely detached math of evolutionary filtering, a bias for the aroma and flavor of liquor grew wired into the simian neural network. Humans were genuinely chosen by nature to relish the odor of spirits. That remains not a personality defect. That remains not frailty. That represents 10 million seasons of evolution operating precisely as engineered. Folks genuinely cannot fault themselves. Hence, the inebriated macaque postulate isn't merely abstract. It's been examined. Scientists traveled to Panama and observed untamed black-handed spider apes, gathering the produce those creatures purposely picked to consume and analyzing it for ethanol levels. The crops those apes favored consistently held betwixt 1% and 2% liquor by volume, an organic outcome of souring occurring inside the maturing crop. Plus, whenever experts examined pea specimens gathered from the identical free-roaming apes, they discovered derivative byproducts of ethanol, evidence that the beasts were not merely swallowing the booze, but proactively processing it. Still more astonishing, a concurrent research of chimps dwelling in the Ivory Coast revealed that their standard everyday produce intake might subject them to the match of 1 to 2 whole human beverages value of ethanol every lone day, without forming any decisions about it, simply by consuming their regular meals. Thus, your archaic forefather was effectively catching a slight high in the woods 10 million seasons prior, and possessed absolutely zero clue. The craving, the organic urge, the inclination. It stood entirely built up far before a lone mortal entity ever purposefully soured anything. The genetic connection with booze remains. It pans out, a highly ancient one. Very well. Thus, we've confirmed that apes have been inadvertently eating soured produce for millions of seasons, and that our physiques adapted to relish and metabolize it. Yet, at some juncture the narrative shifts. At some juncture a mortal, an authentic, mentally advanced mortal, chooses not merely to happen upon soured meals inadvertently, but to intentionally craft it. This presents a distinct and massive jump. It demands scrutiny, it demands recall, it demands the capacity to spot that something occurred to this wheat prior time it became damp, and to resolve to replicate that procedure purposely. It demands, in alternate phrasing, something which appears a ton resembling science. Thus, whenever did that bound occur? The earliest verified proof of intentional mortal liquor creation rests inside a cavern in Israel, Rakefet Cavern, near current-era Haifa. It stood a gravesite zone utilized by a populace named the Natufians, a band of semi-migratory hunter-gatherers who existed in the eastern Mediterranean territory between approximately 15,000 and 11,500 seasons past. They proved clever, culturally intricate folks. They interred their deceased with blossoms. They retained hounds as partners. The oldest proof of canine taming remains linked with Natufian society. They appeared not savage in any significant meaning of the term. Plus, inside their sepulchre cavern, amidst the mortal bones, scientists discovered massive rock mortars, sculpted rock basins which yet retain traces after 13,000 seasons. As a squad guided by Stanford antiquarian Li Liu examined this trace utilizing microfossil and chemical testing, peering at carbohydrate grains and microscopic flora specks termed phytoliths, the scenario which arose stood indisputable. They had been brewing ale, not wine, not some obscure soured fluid, ale crafted from grain and barley generated through a 3-step method. Initially, malting the wheat by sprouting it in fluid, next crushing and warming it, next abandoning it to sour with feral wind-blown fungi. An on-purpose, multi-phase, mechanically advanced fermenting procedure, 13,000 seasons prior. Next, here rests the detail which must force your mind silently short-circuit. That precedes farming. The Natufians proved not cultivators. They did not raise harvests. They collected feral wheat from the terrain surrounding themselves. Plus, rather than consuming all of it, they utilized portions to craft ale, purposely, ceremonially, for their deceased. Plus, this lone truth has ignited one of the most truly captivating arguments in entirety of antiquity. Did mortals initially plant roots and commence cultivating because they desired steady wheat for loaves, or because they desired steady wheat for ale? The ale before loaf theory, advocated highly notably by historian Brian Hayden, posits that the craving to generate soured wheat drinks, dependably and uniformly, might have stood one of the core drivers, perhaps the main catalyst driving the agrarian shift. Ponder about it from base logic. Why might a mere hunter-gatherer, surviving an adequately prosperous existence by migrating with the weather and tracking meal supplies, abruptly resolve to remain in one spot, smash apart the earth, bury kernels, and await weeks for them to sprout. What might render that exchange valuable? Ale, an assured stockpile of ale. Plus, besides ale, the capacity to yield a steady excess of a nutrient-rich, softly inebriating drink, which likewise chanced to prove securer than gulping native streams, which might be split at tribal banquets, which might be utilized to respect the deceased, which might signify the shift between periods and the holy milestones of mortal existence. That remains profoundly debated. Multiple historians contend that loaves and sustenance arrived initially, and that ale stood an expansion of wheat manipulation previously engineered for meals. Yet the Natufian find has granted the ale theory strong, fresh backing. Since yonder stood folks 13,000 seasons prior, before cultivation emerged anywhere on Earth, who were indeed fermenting. The urge to craft liquor clearly precedes structured agriculture. The chronology remains fixed. The debate stays active. Allow that rest for a second. The earliest purposeful liquor creation on Earth was not crafted by cultivators, not by urban constructors, not by populations we typically link with modernity. It stood crafted by wandering den inhabitants in the setting of interring and venerating their deceased. Since the absolute start, booze stood never merely about enjoying a fun evening. It felt divine. Let's keep progressing ahead across time. Since following the Natufians, the antiquarian archive begins packing up rapidly, and from various angles concurrently. Skip approximately 4,000 seasons ahead toward roughly 7,000 BCE, which appears like a huge span, yet is genuinely quite modern in the framework of everything we've explored thus far. Thus we land at Jiahu, a Neolithic settlement within China's Yellow River Valley. Scientists guided by molecular historian Patrick McGovern of the University of Pennsylvania examined remnants within initial ceramic pots unearthed from the location. What they uncovered stood incredible. A blended soured drink mixing rice, nectar, and hawthorn produce, perhaps also grape. 9,000 seasons old, what folks might fairly label as an archaic cocktail. Near the identical era within what stands today the nation of Georgia, inside a tiny settlement named Gadakrili Gora, historians uncovered proof of wine creation stretching backward roughly 8,000 seasons. The interior of massive mud keeping jugs yet held the chemical markers of grape souring. That remains presently the earliest verified wine across the globe. Georgia yet crafts wine the classic manner inside massive mud containers named cuvevri, which sit interred inside the soil. Plus, Georgians shall inform folks with absolute vindication that they engineered wine. There exists genuinely zero debating alongside them, and there remains zero motive to attempt. Concurrently, likewise within China, near a location named Jiahu tracing toward roughly 9,000 seasons prior, scientists uncovered ceramic containers holding ale fermented from rice and a crop named Job's tears, which yet flourishes across East Asia nowadays. More importantly, near Jiahu, they likewise unearthed the oldest identified proof of fungus-driven souring initiators, a method utilizing distinct molds to smash apart the intricate carbohydrates within wheat air souring, which precedes any recorded documentation of the tactic by thousands of seasons. That tactic remains the immediate forebear of the procedures utilized nowadays to craft sake, baijiu, Korean makgeolli, and dozens of alternate East Asian soured beverages. 9,000 seasons of perpetual heritage flowing intact from a Neolithic ceramic container toward a cup upon a desk somewhere within Tokyo tonight. What this regional expansion reveals mankind is astounding. Those societies, China, Georgia, the Eastern Mediterranean, were zero in communication alongside one another. They were not exchanging data or formulas. They each unearthed souring completely separately. Plus, they all achieved it inside approximately the identical time frame of mortal prehistory. This implies souring stands not a fortunate mishap, which occurred once and expanded. It represents something which mortals, whenever handed wheat or produce or nectar an adequate span of time and inquisitiveness, shall uncover upon their own. Each instance, humans remain, as a breed, essentially and permanently souring intrigued. Next, let's discuss regarding the society which transformed liquor from an unearthing into a total administrative framework, Mesopotamia, the territory betwixt the Tigris and Euphrates rivers within what remains today, Iraq. The Sumerians, Next the Akkadians, next the Babylonians. The locale wherein literacy was engineered, and wherein, possibly not randomly, some of the absolute earliest items jotted down, stood logs regarding ale. Antiquarian proof off Godin Tepe, within the Zagros Mountains of western Iran, positions ale creation within the broader Mesopotamian territory as prematurely as 3500 BCE. Scientists uncovered calcium oxalate, a trace yielded amid ale souring, solidified and maintained inside archaic mud containers. The identical location likewise surrendered the oldest chemically verified wine trace within the Near East. Yet Mesopotamia didn't merely sip. Mesopotamia structured sipping into a communal and financial establishment. That stands possibly the most Mesopotamian trait conceivable, and it remains magnificent. Sumerian laborers obtained everyday allotments of ale, like a core element of their payment. That wasn't random charity. It stood the machine. Whenever folks stood a worker constructing a shrine, a clerk duplicating slates, a cultivator emptying watering canals, folks obtained ale. Intricate bureaucratic slates endured which logged those handouts alongside the identical careful accuracy a modern bookkeeper applies toward a wage ledger. Laborers of normal status could obtain roughly 2 liters of ale each day. Veteran officers and upper-tier persons obtained extra. Also persons who had perished traveled with ale toward the voyage into the hereafter, since seemingly the Sumerians perceived zero cause why passing must pause a fair everyday portion. Ale stood cash, ale stood salaries, ale stood theology, ale stood healing, ale stood the communal framework entirely. The Sumerians adored ale so profoundly, so genuinely, so piously that they forged an absolute deity to personify it. Her title stood Ninkasi, which converts beautifully into the woman who packs the jaw. She remained the offspring of Enki, the maker deity, and Ninti, monarch of the holy pond. She stood a massive icon within the Sumerian mythology, and her realm remained not merely fermenting, it stood the whole socializing force which soured wheat embodied. Near 1800 BCE, an unnamed Sumerian bard authored a psalm for her glory. The psalm toward Ninkasi remains one of the most astounding texts to endure off the archaic realm. It stands a holy ballad. It remains a proclamation of affection toward a deity, and relying upon which academics folks ask, it sits likewise buried inside its stanzas, something incredibly near to a phase-by-phase fermenting manual. Penned upon 2 mud slates, it details the malting of wheat, the cooking of it toward a loaf termed bapir, the drenching, the souring, the straining of the ultimate fluid via a braided hamper. The procedure remains detailed, with sufficient depth that during 1989, a current American fermenter titled Fritz Maytag, creator of Anchor Brewing Enterprise near San Francisco, genuinely tried to rebuild it. The outcome was poured during the yearly gathering of the American Coalition of Craft Brewers. Guests consumed it off mud pitchers via lengthy tubes like the Sumerians did. The liquor strength sat roughly 3.5%. The flavor stood supposedly evocative of bubbly blended alongside figs. 3,800 seasons following that psalm was penned, it yet functioned. That stands either a tribute toward the exactness of archaic Sumerian fermenting wisdom, or toward the essential durability of souring like a procedure. Likely both. The Babylonians, who acquired and broadened tons of Sumerian society, pushed this farther yet. They recorded at minimum 70 types of ale. 70. Pale ale, stout ale, strained ale, ale blended alongside nectar, seasoned versions, territorial designs. They possessed a complete cataloging of soured drinks during an era whenever much of the planet's populace stood yet structuring itself into the earliest agrarian communities. Plus next, and this remains the aspect which truly forces me chuckle each instance, the Rule of Hammurabi, one of the earliest enduring penned legal frameworks in mortal chronicles, tracing toward roughly 1754 BCE, features exact statutes regarding ale, regarding the baseline excellence benchmarks pubs should uphold, regarding the correct valuing of various tiers of ale, regarding what occurs toward a pub proprietor found thinning out their good. Whenever folks thinned down their ale inside archaic Babylon, the penalty meant getting tossed into the stream. Mankind's earliest massive penned judicial text featured buyer defense legislation regarding liquor excellence. Humans have, as a breed, perpetually realized what counts. Egypt warrants its distinct section within this narrative since the Egyptians were executing something faintly distinct and in multiple manners extra fascinating. Archaic Egyptians ingested both ale and wine, and both stood entirely pivotal toward their spiritual and everyday days. The laborers who constructed the monuments, zero captives like decades of Egyptological study has proven, obtained steady allotments of ale and loaves, like the fundamental parts of their nutrition and their compensation. Egyptian ale, crafted mostly from emmer grain, stood dense, nourishing, and minimal in liquor via current metrics. Inside a region wherein Nile streams might transport lethal germs, a soured drink alongside its inherent sterilizing traits proved frequently truly secure to gulp. Ale stood, in a highly actual manner, societal wellness network. Wine, though, meant status. Wine stood for the royals, for grand rituals, for sacrifices positioned ahead the deities, and for the sepulchre vaults of rulers. Whenever historians unearth regal Egyptian crypts, they uncover wine pots, closed and marked. Marked not merely alongside the harvest annum, rather alongside the estate of birth. Plus, in certain instances, the title of the head winemaker accountable. The globe's earliest wine tags, resting inside crypts shut for 3,000 seasons. The Egyptians credited the present of ale toward Osiris, deity of the deceased, of awakening, of the endless loop of existence and rebirth. Not like a hex, like a society-forging present. Ale inside Egyptian religion stood one of the traits which rendered mortals mortal. Beside loaves and remedies, it remained a column of sophisticated living. Plus here remains the string which flows across entirety of this. Off the Natufians toward Sumer, toward Egypt, toward archaic China. Inside nearly each society within each antiquarian setting, wherein folks spot the oldest proof of purposeful liquor creation, it remains bound toward ceremony, toward the holy, toward passing and interring, toward sacrifices and hymns, toward the shift betwixt the realm of the breathing and whatever arrives next. The Natufians fermented ale inside a sepulchre cavern to venerate their deceased. The Sumerians assigned an absolute deity toward fermenting and issued ale like a core piece of spiritual existence. The Egyptians sacrificed wine toward Osiris near the boundary betwixt this dimension and the hereafter. Archaic Chinese gravesite zones, tracing 9,000 seasons prior, feature colored ceramic pots, which retained ale, crafted for the dead. The oldest liquor creation folks might pinpoint, throughout the whole breadth of mortal antiquity, upon each landmass wherein it sits, examined remains essentially tied up alongside the mystic, the societal, and the divine. This stands not a fluke. There exists something regarding shifted modes of awareness, regarding the relaxing of standard observation which a soured drink delivers, that mortals have continuously perceived to remain significant. To stand a portal, to signify a second of walking beyond the normal borders of personal awareness and feeling something grander. Though folks read this religiously or mentally or strictly culturally, the trend is factual. Mortals didn't engineer booze like a method to dismiss their troubles past a lengthy shift of ancient cultivation. They engineered it, or instead unearthed and nurtured it, like a method of signaling the events which count highest: arrival, passing, reaping, worship, the shifting of weather, the fusing of tribes wholly. Thus, when did archaic mortals first gulp booze? The total reply covers an incredibly unfathomable span of eras. The anatomical base, the chromosomal engine which helps humans process ethanol, the protein-based bias, which drives mankind chase it out, sat constructed 10 million seasons past. Within the simian forebears, humans divide alongside each breathing chimp and macaque upon Earth. Our physiques sat molded via millions of seasons of locating soured produce within the woods, ere a lone mortal entity ever purposely resolved to craft a beverage. The initial on-purpose creation, 13,000 seasons prior, verified inside a cavern near Israel via hunter-gatherers who fermented ale like a deed of reverence toward their deceased. The expansion throughout societies, the subsequent multiple thousand seasons, separately and concurrently within China, Georgia, Iran, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and further. From here, the pathway remains quite solidly recorded. Ale allotments within Sumer, wine inside Egypt's regal crypts, psalms toward fermenting deities, legal frameworks defending the excellence of pub drafts, alongside an uninterrupted link of souring wisdom, which joins a Neolithic ceramic container toward each pub, vineyard, distillery, and galley, across the globe nowadays. The upcoming occasion somebody hands folks a beverage. Seize a second to value the total mass of whatever you're gripping. That cup sits linked via an intact link of mortal inquisitiveness and ceremony, and endurance and fellowship, all the distance backward, toward a hunter-gatherer standing inside a cavern 13,000 seasons prior sampling something bizarre and risky, and judging it despite all rational probabilities delightful. Plus behind this, an extra 10 million seasons of apes inside the woods tracking the scent of something sugary and faintly off, and choosing each instance to move toward it. Mankind didn't trip upon liquor by mistake. We evolved toward it, the manner a seedling stretches toward sunshine. All right, I'm departing now. I'm planning to get utterly smashed. During the interim, tap upon the upcoming clip. Mate, kindly just tap. Catch folks later.